Have you ever looked back at your childhood and wondered why you were so different from the other children around you? Perhaps you felt things more deeply. Perhaps you saw things others didn't see. Perhaps you carried questions that none of your playmates seemed to ask. And perhaps you thought something was wrong with you, that you were broken somehow, that you didn't fit the mold everyone else seemed to slip into so easily. But what if I told you that those very things you thought made you strange were actually signs? Signs that you were already waking up to something bigger, something the world around you hadn't quite noticed yet. Signs that your consciousness was already stretching beyond the usual boundaries, like a seed cracking open beneath the soil long before anyone sees the green shoot above ground. Let me share with you 5 signs from childhood that might prove you are already on this path, already sensing the music that most people never hear. The first sign is that you felt everything too deeply. Were you the child who cried when you saw a dead bird on the sidewalk? The one who couldn't watch certain movies because the sadness stayed with you for days? The one who felt the mood of a room the moment you walked into it, like stepping into water and knowing instantly whether it's warm or cold? Other children seemed to bounce along. They laughed, they played, they moved on. But you absorbed everything. A harsh word from a teacher didn't just sting for a moment. It lived in you. You replayed it. You felt it in your chest like a weight. When your parents argued, even if they thought you were asleep, you felt the tension like a vibration in the air. You couldn't explain it. You just knew. This wasn't weakness, though everyone might have told you to toughen up, to stop being so sensitive. This was actually your antenna, your instrument for picking up signals that others missed. The awakened soul doesn't have thick walls. It has thin membranes. And yes, this means you feel the pain more acutely, but it also means you feel the beauty more acutely. You feel the truth more acutely. Most people go through life with their receivers turned down low. They have to, otherwise the noise would overwhelm them. But you came in with the volume turned up. You couldn't help it. This is how you were tuned. And while it made childhood harder, it also meant you were learning to read life at a level most people never access. Think of it this way. A musician with perfect pitch hears every note, every slight variation. To someone without that gift, the song sounds fine either way. But the musician knows. They hear what's off. They hear what's beautiful. They can't not hear it. You were born with something like perfect pitch for emotion, for energy, for the undercurrents of human experience. So if you were that sensitive child, the one who felt too much, understand this: you weren't defective. You were awake. Or at least, you were waking up. The world tried to teach you to shut down, to build walls, to stop feeling so much. But part of you refused. And that refusal, that insistence on staying open even when it hurt, that was the sign. The second sign is that you asked questions nobody else was asking. Do you remember sitting in church or at the dinner table or in school and suddenly thinking, but why? Why are we doing it this way? Who decided this? What if we're wrong? Maybe you asked these questions out loud and got uncomfortable looks. Maybe adults told you to be quiet, to stop being difficult, to just accept things the way they are. Or maybe you learned quickly to keep the questions to yourself, to smile and nod while inside your mind was spinning with doubts and curiosities that nobody else seemed to share. Other children wanted to know how things worked. You wanted to know why things were the way they were. Other children accepted the rules of the game. You wanted to know who made the rules and whether the rules made any sense. This wasn't rebellion for the sake of rebellion. This was genuine wondering. You looked at the world and it didn't quite add up. People said one thing and did another. They followed traditions without understanding them. They accepted suffering as normal. They chased after things that seemed hollow, and you, even as a child, sensed something was off about all of it. The awakened soul is born with a kind of cosmic skepticism. Not cynicism, skepticism. A willingness to question, to peek behind the curtain, to not take the surface story as the whole truth. Most people never develop this. They accept the script they're handed and read their lines until the curtain falls. But you couldn't. Something in you kept whispering, there's more to this. Look closer. Don't believe everything you're told. Maybe you asked about death and what happens after. Maybe you asked about God and why people fight over God. Maybe you asked about fairness and why some people have so much while others have nothing. Maybe you asked about the point of it all, the meaning, the reason we're here. These are not childish questions. These are the oldest questions, the deepest questions, the questions that sages and mystics have wrestled with for thousands of years, and you were asking them at age 7 or 8 or 10. Why? Because your soul was already looking beyond the game. It was already sensing that the ordinary explanations weren't sufficient. The third sign is that you spent a lot of time alone, and you liked it. Were you the child who wandered off to sit under a tree while the other kids played tag? The one who could spend hours in your room with your books or your drawings, or just your thoughts? The one who didn't always need friends around, who sometimes preferred the quiet company of yourself. It's not that you were antisocial. You could play with others, you could laugh and run and be part of the group. But something in you also craved solitude. You needed it the way you needed sleep. Too much time with people drained you. Too much noise, too much talking, too much surface chatter, and you started to feel lost, scattered, like you were forgetting something important. Other children seemed to fear being alone. They needed the group. They needed the validation, the distraction, the constant stimulation. But you went inward. You found something there in the silence that the noise couldn't give you. Perhaps you called it imagination. Perhaps you called it daydreaming. Perhaps you didn't call it anything at all. You just knew that when you sat quietly, when you let the world fade a bit, something else emerged. A stillness, a presence, a sense that you were more than just your name and your body and your circumstances. The awakened soul requires solitude, not all the time, but regularly, like a well that needs time to refill. You were already practicing this as a child, though nobody taught you. You were already learning to listen to the voice that doesn't shout, the voice that only speaks when everything else gets quiet. People might have worried about you. They might have said you were too introverted, too withdrawn, too much in your own world. But you weren't lost in your own world, you were found there. You were discovering that the most interesting thing in your life wasn't out there in the playground, or the shopping mall, or the television. It was in here, in the vast interior space of your own awareness. This is what meditation masters spend years trying to teach. The art of being alone without being lonely. The art of sitting still without getting bored. The art of finding richness in silence. You stumbled into this as a child. And while it might have made you seem odd to others, it was actually a sign of great spiritual maturity. You were already learning to be with yourself, to listen to yourself, to trust the inner quiet more than the outer noise. The fourth sign is that you saw through pretense and couldn't play along. Did you ever watch adults lie and wonder why nobody else seemed to notice? Not big dramatic lies, small ones, the polite ones, the social ones. Your mother smiling at a neighbor she just complained about. Your father pretending to like his boss at a company party. Your teacher praising a student she clearly couldn't stand. Other children might not have noticed or cared, but you noticed. You saw the mask and you saw the face beneath it, and it bothered you. It felt wrong. It felt like everyone was playing a game and pretending the game was real life. Maybe you tried to point it out once or twice, but Mom, you said you didn't like her. But Dad, you said your boss was a fool. And you got the look that said, hush. We don't talk about these things. This is how the world works. But something in you resisted. Something in you couldn't fake it, couldn't play along, couldn't put on the mask quite as easily as everyone else seemed to. At parties, you stood there awkward, unable to make small talk that felt empty. At family gatherings, you felt like you were watching a performance. Everyone had their lines, everyone knew their role, and you were supposed to play yours. But you couldn't quite do it. Or when you did, it felt exhausting, like wearing clothes that don't fit. The awakened soul has a very low tolerance for pretense. It sees the theater, and it can't unsee it. This doesn't make you better than others. It doesn't make you more moral. It just means you're operating at a different frequency. You're picking up on the reality beneath the surface, and once you see it, you can't go back to pretending you don't. This is the emperor's new clothes. Everyone agreeing to see something that isn't there, because agreement is easier than truth. But you were the child who couldn't agree. Not because you wanted to be difficult, but because your eyes worked differently. You saw what was actually there, and what was actually there was often quite different from what people said was there. As you grew older, you probably learned to navigate this better. You learned to play the game when necessary, to smile and nod, to keep your observations to yourself. But you never forgot. You never stopped seeing. And that seeing, that inability to be fully fooled by the surface story, that was a sign of your awakening. The fifth sign is that you felt homesick for a place you'd never been. This is perhaps the strangest sign, and yet many awakened souls will recognize it immediately. Did you ever feel as a child a kind of longing, not for something specific, not for a toy or a trip or a person, but for something you couldn't name? A feeling that you were far from home, even when you were sitting in your own house. A feeling that you belonged somewhere else, somewhere you couldn't quite remember or describe. Some children feel this as a sadness. Others feel it as a restlessness, a sense that this world, this life, this ordinary existence isn't quite right. Not wrong exactly, just not complete. Like you're waiting for something. Like you're supposed to be somewhere else, doing something else, being something else. You might have looked at the stars and felt it. You might have sat by water and felt it. You might have been in a crowd and suddenly felt it wash over you. This ache, this strange nostalgia for something you've never experienced, at least not in this life. The truth is, the awakened soul remembers. Not consciously, perhaps. Not in words or images, but somewhere deep down it remembers that it is not merely this body, this name, this story. It remembers that it came from something bigger, something infinite, something that this ordinary life only hints at. And so there is always this faint homesickness, this longing to return to the source, to remember fully, to wake up completely. Other children don't feel this because they are not yet sensing the gap between what they are and what they appear to be. They take the world at face value. They accept that this is it, this is life, and they settle into it. But you couldn't settle. Not completely. Something in you remained unsettled, remained awake, remained aware that there is more. This is not depression, though it can be mistaken for it. This is spiritual memory, the soul remembering itself. And if you felt this as a child, that strange homesickness for nowhere in particular, that longing for something you couldn't name, then you were already waking up, already sensing that life is more than meets the eye. already knowing in some wordless way that you are not just a person living a life, you are consciousness itself, briefly wearing the costume of a person. So what does it all mean? Here we are. 5 signs. Feeling too deeply, asking impossible questions, needing solitude, seeing through the masks, longing for home. If even 1 or 2 of these resonated with your childhood, chances are you were already an awakened soul, or at least a soul in the process of awakening. But what does this mean for you now? Well, it means several things. First, it means your childhood wasn't a mistake. All that strangeness, all that sensitivity, all that feeling different and out of place, it wasn't a flaw, it was a feature. You were picking up on things that most people never notice. You were seeing what most people never see. And yes, this made growing up harder, but it also made you real in a way that many people never become. Second, it means you have a responsibility, not a burden. A responsibility is huge, because the world needs people who can feel deeply, who can ask real questions, who can sit in silence, who can see through pretense, who can remember that we are more than these bodies and these stories. The world is drowning in noise and surface and distraction. And you, with your particular way of being, you are medicine. You are an antidote to the sleepwalking. Third, it means you don't have to pretend anymore. If you spent your childhood trying to be like everyone else, trying to fit in, trying to dull your sensitivity or quiet your questions or hide your need for solitude, you can stop now. You can accept that you were built differently. Not better, not worse, differently. And that difference is exactly what you're meant to bring to this world. The awakened soul isn't awakened because it's special. It's awakened because it couldn't help but wake up. It tried to sleep like everyone else, but something kept poking it, nudging it, whispering in its ear, and finally it opened its eyes and realized, oh, I've been awake this whole time. I just thought I was supposed to be asleep. If you were that child, the one who felt too much, asked too much, needed quiet too much, saw too much, longed too much, then you were already awake. Perhaps you didn't know what to call it. Perhaps you tried to ignore it, or suppress it, or make it go away. But it didn't go away, did it? Because it's not something you can get rid of. It's what you are. And now, looking back, you can see that those signs were not problems to be solved. They were invitations. Invitations to trust your own experience, to honor your own awareness, to stop pretending you're something you're not. The meaning of life is just to be alive. It is so plain, and so obvious, and so simple. Yet everybody rushes around in a great panic as if it were necessary to achieve something beyond themselves. But the awakened soul knows this already. Even as a child it knew. It didn't need to be taught. It just knew somewhere deep down that the point isn't to get somewhere else or become someone else. The point is to be here, to be awake, to be present to this strange and beautiful and terrible and miraculous fact of existence. So if these signs are yours, if you recognize yourself